Gee, that's something.
I was just about to say, have you done Twitter Spaces before?
No, I've never even tried it. Never even listened to one.
Are you? So I know who you are, IRL. I don't know if you're. How would you prefer
I'm
to
real
be?
naming, man.
Okay,
Real
all right.
naming.
You're real name. It's
No
I guess
protect, man.
if it's
Just
good
do it
enough for
raw.
BAP, it's good enough for us, I suppose.
Yeah. Just doing it raw, man.
Doing it raw. That's how I like to do it. Honestly, I think that's like the new trend. You know, I think it is a new trend. I think this the real name stuff is just kind of it's the future.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of see it is you have your pseudonym and you say whatever you want, but you make it so it's kind of an open secret who you are.
Yeah.
And then if somebody wants to, like, go try to, like, dox you, then it's kind of like this funny thing where everybody's like, we already knew that. You're gay.
Exactly. I mean, I totally, dude. I mean, that's basically how I have done it because I was like a officer at the Talon Corporation. I was like a matter of public record that I was, whatever. I was doxxed, born doxxed. But I've always been like, mostly because I think it's a matter of not respecting someone's nom de plume is kind of like it's like a taste thing. You know what I mean? It's like a polite thing to do more than like some sort of Jason Bourne kind of secret agent shit.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, anybody that has a public presence on the internet has to know that, like, everybody that wants to know who they are does.
Yeah, exactly.
State like 20 different ways.
Exactly.
What I mean?
And I think also, at least for me, it's funny. I think about this sometimes because I've never really had like an alt per se because as long as I've been working on Urbit, I was just public about it. I made no attempt to really like hide myself. And so I think that's actually, this is I guess I'm counter signaling a little bit, but it's like, there's something good about that because it's like, it's good to just know that eventually, everyone will be doxxed eventually if anyone cares about you. And so it's one of those things where it's kind of like, it's somewhat of a moderating force. Like, I don't think that I've ever said things that I would, that I don't believe or like dissembled, but I've certainly been like probably more, I don't know, less like offensive about it than I am in real life. Which I think is probably actually a good thing. It's not good for everyone just to be out there just sort of like, filling the world with ugliness necessarily.
No, I mean that's true. That's true. I've always kind of been a blunt person, but I at the same time always seek to be polite to everybody that I'm around in real life. If anything, I think I'm probably nicer in real life than I am in.
I think you're definitely a very polite person, but you're also a very blunt person in real life. And I think also the fact that so for everybody who's listening, maybe don't know this, Logan and I worked together at Tlon a few years ago, and so it's like we've been in the trenches together IRL, and so. But it's funny because I think that also if you have an IRL environment where you feel like you can kind of speak your mind, I mean, of course, even when we were working all together on Urbit, it was like there still were some. It wasn't a total free for all, but it was like for the most part, we could say what we wanted to say. I felt like it made me desire like venting on the internet less. I didn't feel like I like needed to vent on the internet. Maybe other people feel differently.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I kind of went through a little phase where I thought it was really cathartic and pleasant.
Yeah.
But on the one hand, I mean, it was less of a kind of an emotion-driven thing and more of just like a slam poetry, free-for-all, just like stream of consciousness thing. Yeah. And I really liked that because, at the end of the day, I mean, the public education system, fills you up with all these random nonsense stories, for like 20 years. And it's kind of nice to just have a little bit of like a Finnegan's Wake thing and just like, let it all jam together.
I totally agree.
Let it all come out.
I totally agree.
And then you can just kind of like relax at home and just like,
yeah,
what is it? Do some gardening and just have some good times.
Cozy post in the Urbit GC. Well, it's funny. I was talking to my wife, and we were talking about social media, whether the youth still use social media and all this. And I was saying it's like, and I think her thing was she kind of doubted it somewhat, and I was like, I think what's interesting is that people who a lot of the as you know, Logan, I'm IRL I'm an elderly person. I'm 40 years old, so I'm like, I feel like I'm sort of like out of the loop somewhat. But I do think that the people like your age, Logan, like who use Twitter a lot, it's like it's a little bit more artistic. It's not. It's you know what I mean. It's not like you don't consider it to be like, oh, here's the equivalent of like boomers taking pictures of their whatever. I don't know what boomers take pictures of, but their fishing trip. It's not like about your life. It's so much. It's more of a creative act. The timeline is a creative act, which I think is I like that actually.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that. Well, okay, so we can kind of be a little bit cliche, and we can kind of just lean into that. But I really think that more or less, Twitter and tweeting is a kind of folk art.
Oh, I agree 100%. 100%.
And one of the ways in which I think that is that can be viewed is at the very least like everything that anything that you say, anything that you do on Twitter, insofar as it's eminently shareable, and is in fact the precise same medium that an advertisement sitting on the same website is done. Anything that you do is basically an advertisement. But generally, in fact, it's almost always an advertisement for a lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think that you do this very well. I mean, the Zorp does this very well. 21E8 does this well. Urbit, I think, has been doing this well for a long time. It's like, and I feel like you and I have talked about this in the past, right? I mean, just how like everything is a lifestyle ultimately, right? I mean, all brands are ultimately, if they do it right, become lifestyle brands. Like, I mean, Rust is a lifestyle, or Haskell is definitely a lifestyle.
It is. Programmer socks.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's like, I think people kind of have this idea sometimes that like you're not real technology if you're also have like a lifestyle component. Does that make sense? Like this is like a prejudice I see sometimes where it's sort of like.
Well, I mean, I honestly, I think that this is mainly just nerds that don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. And I tell people sometimes like the people that are the easiest to influence are the people who think they can't be influenced, right? So like, oh, I make all of my decisions are de facto rational or a priori rational.
Yeah. No, Rust is the objectively best language.
Of course.
So that's why I had
That's not marketing. No, it's just it just is the facts. Exactly. So, but I think like I mean, at least the Zorp brand I think has been really really good at this, and so I'd be interested to know more kind of like more about your thoughts on that. Like how do you I mean, because the stuff that you're doing, which we'll get into, of course, is like by almost like is, dare I say, hermetic, abstruse. It's probably the best word for it. So
no, yeah. I mean, it's the stuff. The work that we're doing is certainly, I mean, on one level abstract, and in another way obscure. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's at the intersection of two different obscure lines of work. And so one of the things that I've thought a lot about is like more or less how to communicate about what we do. And I think that one of the key ways to do so is kind of what you're already kind of touching upon, which is having a very, very intentional media process. Mm-hmm. And the intention there, I mean, is more or less to kind of, rather than focus on the what of what we're doing and kind of the dry technical particulars, instead focus on kind of just in a very direct way what it means to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good.
And how we feel while doing it.
Yeah, that's so good. I mean, it's funny because this is like also one of these things. This is another example I think of kind of technology people sort of rediscovering just basic truisms of like marketing or advertising. It's a cliche among advertisers that you lead with benefits. You don't lead with features, right? You're like, so I mean, and we think about that, most advertisers talk about that in the sort of context of cigarettes or whatever, Pepsi. But it's the same thing for ZK proofs, right? At some level. It's like, what is ZK proofs going to do? Wait, first of all, what do ZK proofs do for you? This is a rhetorical question right now, but you can answer it a little bit. Like, what do they do for you, the potential consumer, right? And then secondly, like, what is the I think you nailed it, right? It's like, what's the motivation for the team at Zorp, which is going to be the brand differentiator in the future world where there's 25 Zorp competitors, right? And why would you go with Zorp Corp instead of, I don't know, Zerp Corp, you know? And so I think but like I said, this is a kind of thing where I just feel like technology just lags so far behind in marketing in a lot of ways, broadly considered.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. I think that something that I really see is, I mean, I think, okay, well, I'll kind of back up a little bit.
Back up.
Technology is a means to an end. Technology is a means to an end. Technology is not an end in itself. And insofar as that's the case, understanding some technological project has to hinge upon what do you want to do in the world.
Yes.
And so what we really want to do is just make computers less scary, and do so by making it so that the computer is not what's in control.
Okay.
The computer's not in control. The computer is your servant. It's going to do what you want it to do. You're going to know that it did it right, and you're going to know that it didn't do it wrong. And that's all that's going to happen. And the computer's going to be super dumb, super simple, no magic tricks, and you're not going to have to be scared of it because you're going to understand what it's doing, and it's only going to be doing the things you want it to be doing.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I feel like that's. Do you feel like what motivates that for you in the ZK work is kind of similar to what motivated you into Urbit initially?
Oh, it's identical.
The same.
I just found another lever and another engine.
Yeah. I mean, 'cause I agree with you 100%. And that's kind of, you're speaking my language in terms of what got me into Urbit originally. And the way I put it sometimes is like, you're an Ivan Illich fan, right? Or you. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Is like, there's a distinction, right, between, he has a good terminology, I forget what he uses, but it's like the bad stuff is industrial technology, I want to say, and the good stuff is, I forget what he says. It's like tools or something. Convivial technology, right? And it's like, basically the distinction I draw sometimes is between like a hammer and like a housing development, It's like a hammer is just like, very few people think that they are controlled by their, the hammer that sits in their shed, yet that's a tool. It's a piece of technology. It enables it's like a prosthetic for human activity, right? So it's
yeah, for sure. I mean, it modifies what you're capable of.
Like a housing development constrains what you do. It limits what you do. And so it's sort of like which one. Computers now are more like a housing development, or a prison. That's probably, at least in a lot of ways. So it's sort of like we want to flip it on its head and make it a tool again, right?
I kind of almost view kind of what we want to do as more or less like an unveiling, or an apocalypse. Like what we really want to do is take it upon ourselves to use the levers that we have at our disposal to transform the current control society, the current, prison with cameras at every angle.
Mental hospital / prison.
Mental hospital / prison. And we want to transform that into a fundamentally less skewed medium. I don't think that there's any possible outcome where we build a utopia. That's not even the aim. That's not a possible outcome. What we are interested in is just making more neutral ground.
Interesting.
And I think that we have the absolute best tools at our disposal to build the largest space of neutral ground.
Okay, very interesting. So, I mean, can you just explain then, from your perspective, how the ZK stuff fits into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, as with many things, the best place to start is Nock. What we really want when we're talking about Nock is we want to be able to have a computing system that's understandable, that's cognizable by a single person, that doesn't need to have teams of 1,000 just trying to understand the bottom layers. Because the very nature of the firm and the very nature of the firm, when organized at these large scales, makes it such that the firm is coercible. And further, that the firm must be at a certain level of organization and bureaucracy and managerialism, that it, in fact, in the coercive environment, must act a certain way.
Yeah.
And so the key with Nock, just period, is to make the computing substrate the practical computing substrate that you can actually use as your base level, understandable and interfaceable with, in the same way that a mechanic interfaces with say a car from the 80s.
Yeah, yeah.
At a small scale.
Let me point something out that I think is interesting that you mentioned. It's funny because do you remember when Dasha on Red Scare made fun of Sam Frank for saying that Urbit was like a truck? And I'm like, he's right. They were not ready for that comparison. In that it's sort of like self-contained in that way. But I think what's interesting that you pointed out is a lot of the kind of when Urbit people or the Urbit extended universe, we talk about the problems of sort of technological society right now. We talk about them. A lot of them have to focus on centralization, specifically of SAS, of just sort of like literally physical network centralization. But I think what you put on is really interesting, which is that there's basically something related but different in that at a certain degree of complexity of the tool, the organization necessary to maintain it, to service it, to build it, etc., itself becomes essentially a target for someone seeking power. So it becomes the high ground, right? You see this in corporations. And so it's sort of like in American corporations now, which become de facto kind of extensions of the state. So what you're saying is that like actually having tools that are simpler in the sense of more cognizable by a single user or person is itself kind of a way of breaking that down, because it would allow, I think the next step is allow smaller teams and individual peoples to have more control and be less need for that gigantic organization. Is that correct?
Yeah. That's exactly right. And the fundamental point here is that smaller firms are just fundamentally not the same thing as a large firm.
Yeah.
Smaller firms can behave utterly differently than a small firm or than a large firm behaves. Because fundamentally you can just build many, many more of them in ways that are more idiosyncratic, because it's kind of like the happy family and unhappy family adage. All unhappy families are different in a litany of ways, and all happy families are the same. It's the exact same thing with large organizations and small organizations. All large organizations are exactly the same in their own unhappy ways.
Yeah. That's very true. And it's interesting because I was thinking about this because this is also another urbanism where it's like there are a lot of problems. I hesitate to say all, but a lot that are scale problems, right? It's sort of like things that work at one scale just become pathological at a different scale, right? This is like cancer is similar to this, right? And I think you could definitely say the same thing about organizations, right? Like it's sort of like, and that's why organization scaling from this small organization to this large multinational organization, it's really not the same thing, even though the stock ticker remains the same.
Yeah, and so to bring it back to ground for a minute, what we want to do, of course, with Nock-based computing is take computing from this thing that requires you to have these very large managerial bureaucratic organizations in order to operate in a competitive way, and turn it into something where you can have a series of, or 1,000 flowers of, small shops that are actually capable of doing interesting work. Yeah. Now, we're not talking about, some nice kibbutz where everyone can just kind of do a little bit of farming and sell into their tiny little community. What I'm really talking about is having teams of 10 be able to do things that, say, the WhatsApp team has been able to do.
Yeah.
Repeatedly.
Yeah.
Where you're having people generate, 10 to 100 millions of dollars of value per team member over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely that's the sort of like strike force vision, right? It's like the PMC vision, where you have this small groups of people that can have very outsized effects. And I think that's like a different, at one level, that's a different vision of technology, you know, than what we see now, which is mostly kind of a leveling effect, sort of a equalitarian, egalitarian effect, where every technology kind of makes everything the same, right? But it's almost like if you had technology that was more envisioned as the Gundam suit, right, or just whatever, and it would just magnify whatever that small group is capable of, magnify it to a global scale. That's like a totally different world in some ways.
Precisely. And so I think that more or less, you know, again, to lean into being a little cliche, we can look at, say, the sovereign individual like notion that the technologies that come out of encryption and semiconductors, et cetera, end up with a world that's vastly more kind of defense driven. In other words, where the balance between offense and defense has shifted fundamentally to be more geared towards defense, and it being harder to go take assets and things like that. And we can also say that in a similar way, and in the same sense, that all technology is first and foremost for military use. In other words, all technology that we really refer to as dual use is in fact mostly just single use, and, and that single use is for military purposes. We can more or less say that what we're talking about is, and this is one of the reasons why I use the word lever for talking about things like Nock or CK, is because what we're talking about when we're discussing these technologies is we're talking about providing new ways to exert force at scale with really, really small groups of people.
Yeah. Leverage, right? Ultimately, you're seeking more leverage always.
Always, yeah. I kind of have a little train of thought that I've gone through, which maybe is not unique or original, but at the very least, I think the turn of phrase is a little bit, which is that technology at its fundamental nature is just asymmetry.
Yeah. I think you're definitely right. I mean, and it's funny because I was just discussing this with a friend, and we were talking about kind of futurism and the original vision of futurism, and sort of like the technology as force multiplier for unique people with unique perspectives, right? Individuals and artists and people who are generally bringing something new, versus the sort of, I think, predominant vision of technology, which is this kind of impersonal tidal force, as it were, that kind of just happens by itself. And I think those things are at tension. They're at odds, I think.
Yeah, I think that what we see a lot of now is technology as a Grey Goo machine, and we really see this in the sense that, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the term, Anthony, internet poisoned.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've met many people that are internet poisoned.
I have.
And in some sense, it's just a consequence of, quote unquote, being up to date or up to speed with internet culture, which is a shame. But I think that we can look at that, and we can look at what, say, the alternative version of it might be, and what the inversion of internet poison might be, or irony poison, or whatever, and say, okay, well, we could imagine, say, an amelioration of, I mean, of course, we can frame it in a dozen ways, but an amelioration of ressentiment, or and forgive my inability to pronounce French words.
That's okay. It's good. As an American, it's actually a virtue to not be able to say French words correctly.
I assume, but I can at least try, and I think that helps too. But we can imagine an amelioration of that, of resentment. We can imagine an amelioration of the atomization that many experience. You could imagine more of a kind of a communion with one's own culture, or with one's own tribe, or with one's own, say, even ancestors, etc. Yeah. That's encouraged by technology, and the way in which technology frees oneself to enact one's will in one's own life.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, just putting technology back at the service of people, as opposed to people being the servants of technology, is like it just seems like a thesis that has no downside from my perspective. But can you Okay, so all that said, everything we've said thus far is pretty much shared, I think, at least by Urbit and Urbit adjacent sort of people and Zorp. But can you talk a little bit more about the sort of ZK, specifically the ZK aspect of this?
Yeah. So I want to start because we talked a little bit about Nock, which is important, but the ZK side is just another angle, and it's one that I think really needs to be emphasized, which is if you're going to have an amazing computing substrate that's very simple and easy to understand, you still don't know what your computer's doing.
Yeah. Yes, that's true.
You don't know what it's doing. And in fact, without manual hand inspection of what your computer is doing at every point that it's doing it, you can't know. And of course, what are computers really good at? Automatically, sequentially doing a bunch of things. What are humans really bad at? Like manually inspecting a bunch of things.
Yeah.
And so if we kind of think about this for a moment, it's quite obvious that we want to know what our computer is doing. Not just what we want, not just what our computer is doing, but we want to know what, say, the abstract computer is doing, because the abstract computer is running our power grid. It's determining our credit score. It's determining what media to present to us. It's determining whether or not our communications are secure. It's determining whether or not our computer will behave the way it's supposed to. In some people's houses, it's determining whether their lights turn on. Even at the level of what color their lights are when they turn on. And so in some things, it's the question is kind of very banal. It's like, oh, well, my smart home's malfunctioning. I guess I've got to go turn on the light switch like a pleb or whatever.
Yeah.
But in other ways, it's much less so. And I've thought a lot about the ways in which computing currently interacts with infrastructure, and it's actually really, really terrifying, frankly.
You mean kind of like lights and power and utilities and this kind of stuff, or by infrastructure?
Yeah. Water dams, food processing facilities, refrigeration of things on their way from one location to another. There's so many ways in which we're utterly dependent on the technologies that we have generated over the past more or less century or two, and yet, well, I mean, for a litany of reasons, and of course we could talk about macro, but it would be neither here nor there. We've underinvested in the maintenance of the existing ways that we can physically modify our built environment, and so our built environment is in fact falling apart. And so what's the solution? Well, of course, if you ask McKinsey, they'll tell you it's Industry 4.0.
Yeah. And more computers.
Yeah. Put the computers in the built environment instead of just having people run the built environment, so that we need fewer people to run the built environment, so that we don't have to invest into the built environment, right?
Yes.
And of
never
course,
never fails idea.
Yeah, never ever fails. Let's just digitalize, right? Let's digitalize those factories. They'll be more efficient. We don't need any old codgers making them work, right? We can just do it. We can just do it with the computer. So, of course, the answer is always more computers. And so the problem, of course, is that it introduces black swan risks, which are really not so uncommon, which, of course, the term is meant to make you think it is uncommon. But what we see in the current environment is that computers, well, they don't really work, right? They're easy to hack in. They're easy to hack into. They don't do what they're supposed to. They don't do what you think they're supposed to.
Yeah.
Even if they are doing what they were technically programmed to be supposed to do. But the cybersecurity angle is really, really wild, right? I mean, a fun example that I've mentioned to many people is Israeli dams were hacked, and they had ransomware put in, and the hackers threatened to flood nearby villages.
Wow.
This is a real thing that happened.
That's a real thing. It's so funny. I remember when I was working back in my military industrial complex days, like, I feel like that was the kind of thing we talked about, this is going to happen. And it's like, well, there we go. Sometimes people got to just see it for themselves,
Yeah, and food processing plants in America are hacked all the time and worldwide. Similarly, we see all kinds of issues with other areas of critical infrastructure. It's not possible to fix with the current systems.
Yeah.
It's not that it's really hard. It's not that everybody just needs to have, I forget the proper terms. So, it's not that everyone needs the proper zero trust software bill of materials.
Yeah.
I
remember all that stuff. Yeah, for sure.
These are not answers. These are not even band-aids. These are just additional bureaucracy to put the blame somewhere else.
Exactly. So I was going to say, what's interesting is like to go back to kind of like, and I like what you're saying, because like there really is this kind of continuum between software and organizational behavior and mass psychology, right? It's like it's really not one thing or the other. A lot of software is just the encoding of a kind of organizational behavior, and so it's interesting that you bring up just the maintenance of this stuff, because really, I think a lot of people, even in these industries, think about the software component essentially as a service industry, meaning that it's like you have the software, but you also have all the people that are like always tinkering with it and maintaining it and fixing it and so forth. So it's much more like a service industry than a goods industry. And it's I feel like a lot of what we're talking about is, both from the Zorp perspective, from the Urbit perspective, is almost moving software more back to a goods type industry, where it's like, you get a car and you have the car, and back in the old days, you could at least nominally fix it yourself, right? It wasn't like you were signing a contract for the rest of your life to have to pay your, your car subscription. And so I think it's like moving away from that model is also part of this whole thing, right?
Yeah, precisely. The way that software is thought of changes in a world where software actually works.
Yeah, and could be proved that it. I mean, I think that's kind of what's like. Let me just see if I can tie this up. It's like,
please.
With what you're saying is that basically, there's an element of trust involved with technology, right? That it's going to behave as you think it's going to behave. I mean, it's almost like an obvious point, right? And so when you have a technology that's largely symbolic, virtual, like computers, we don't have the same intuitions for it, right? You can't just like look at it and think, oh, this chair is broken. No, I know it's not going to work. So for computers, we need something else. And so it's something like a proof that something has been run a certain way, is easily verified. Could provide that level, like basically the making the oversight of the software more human and automatic. Manageable or automatic, even better, right? Manageable by a small group of people and not a whole industry of contractors, right?
Yeah, I mean that's precisely correct. I mean, when I used to work at Uber, I mean, of course, there was the concept of being on call. In other words, it's not that the servers run themselves; it's that all the time you have at least one individual, often two, on every single 8-person team that has a week at a time of looking at the logs and being paged and having their phone buzz. Every single time something is even a little bit awry.
Yeah,
and they don't sleep for like a week at a time.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why you can press a button and get a ride.
Yeah, it's not because technology is so great and automation works perfectly, right? It's just that the labor is kind of shifted around, right?
Yes, precisely. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about verifiable, provable computing is we're talking about technology doing what it's supposed to do automatically. And when we're talking about verifiable Nock computing, we're talking about technology that's simple, doesn't have any sleight of hands, that has a solid foundation, that is doing what it's supposed to do. And the fact that Nock ZK proofs just happen to be extremely efficient, and that there happens to be a whole peer-to-peer network and operating system that's already built with this technology is just icing on the cake from our perspective.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the efficiency, though, I mean, it's like one of those things where making it serve the purpose of being, being at the beck and call of a person. I mean, that is important, right? If it takes a lifetime of the universe to generate a proof, it's like
it's important to kind of bridge this gap between what's practically possible and what's theoretically possible. And I mean, you've worked with me, I mean, I'm not really much of a theoretician. I like things that work.
I like to get it done. Exactly. I could definitely say that about Logan. And it's funny. I think it's interesting that Urbit people, I think some people get the impression that it's a very kind of theoretical crowd, but I've actually found the opposite. It's usually people who just are somewhat huge grug brains, basically. Just like would rather be working on a car than working on a computer, but that's what the hand that has been dealt us. Sure.
And speaking to the kind of like obscurity or the difficulty of understanding like the symbolic that you were discussing, our VP operations has a construction background previously, which happens to be excellent for building infrastructure. Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Well, this is the thing about hiring for these positions, though. I think to find someone with the right mindset among quote unquote tech people is very difficult, I think, sometimes.
No, it is, and it's really, really good to get people from these other fields that are used to building buildings that don't fall down, right?
Yeah, there's something on the line for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Because there's too many people, I think, in the tech industry that frankly have not just been poisoned by the internet, but that have been poisoned by the zero interest rates.
Yeah. Zorp is that's the real poisoning. Zorp poisoning. For sure.
That's right. Zorp is the antidote to Zorp, but
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, this has been great. You and I could talk probably for a long time and should when we go to Lisbon, but why don't we open it up and see if anyone's got questions or would like to speak? Does that sound good, Logan?
Yeah, we can let other people talk. That's
the floor. Crazy. Yeah, it's crazy for you and I. It's a crazy thing for Logan and Anthony to cede the floor. Hold on. So if anyone would like to talk, you can go ahead and request. I think that's how it works. But remember that you have to be on a browser, on the app to do so.
I installed the app just for this.
I know. That's what got me too. What's his face got me? There we go. Oh, we got two guys. Halikarnan, you want to speak? I think your mic's off.
How's that now?
Dude, good.
Beautiful. Hey, very interesting discussion. I think about this stuff all the time. Logan, I'm curious if you have any kind of like first steps you want to talk about in terms of like how you imagine the Zorp proof protocol would integrate with, physical infrastructure. Like what are the layups there? What would you want to like have a proof of concept to like safeguard the signals that physical infrastructure is sending, whether they're positive or negative, to the ultimate benefit of the people who rely on it?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think that the first thing is for us to just release digital infrastructure that actually works before, and if you will, attain worthiness, right? Become worthy, right?
Cool, thanks.
Let's see. I think EE's. I can't pronounce.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So my question is: so what? Like the proofs you're making, what are they about? Are they about the state of the Urbit machine, or are they of type, if I apply these events to the machine, the outcome will be such and such? Because what you just said sounds like you're able to make proofs about this sort of inputs will modify the state in such a way that it doesn't violate whatever, right? So is it about the state, or is it about the state transition that you're making the proofs about?
Yeah, well, this is kind of the beautiful thing about Nock, is that the state and the code are represented in the same minimal little substrate. So we can do proofs about the state, we can do proofs about the code that's transitioning the state, all of the above.
Non-dual proof. Yeah, I definitely recommend. Of course, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about has just made passing reference to Nock. Urbit.org actually has really good and improving everyday Nock documentation and just sort of an introduction to it. I don't know, Logan, do you have other stuff? Has Zorp produced stuff? I'm sure you have to explain this a lot.
Yes. So Zorp.io contains both a link to our white paper, which explains how our proofs work, and also blog posts which explain how to interact with our proof system over the Urbit network, which you can do as of just a couple of weeks ago.
What?
Because we are doing and sponsoring the Urbit Assembly Hackathon. So feel free to get started, play with our proofs, and see if you can win some stars.
That's amazing. I did not realize that.
Yes.
I had to do my homework.
Yeah, so Zorp.io. You can go play with our prover, make some proofs right now.
Very, very cool. Okay, Sarlev and then Mark.
All right. So I've got a question that kind of comes from the perspective of understanding Urbit, but not understanding the runtime, and how does Zorp's proving kind of come from the runtime but prove Nock? Is that like a sensible question to ask?
Okay, yeah, sure. So Zorp's proving, our prover and our verifier are written and defined in Hoon. They are, of course, jetted with Rust. So in that sense, you could say that parts of them come from the runtime. But the definition of our proofs, like all of the code, that defines the specification of what the proof is supposed to be, et cetera, how to verify it, all of this logically is, on the one hand, proving the Nock specification proper. In other words,
nice.
it's not proving that it was, say, executed properly in some particular runtime under some particular conditions. It's proving it, period, in a mathematics sense.
Wow.
Cool.
Does that make sense, Sarlev?
Well, yeah. So, follow-up question would be, as runtimes evolve. I know you guys are working on Aries. Nock is a specification for a computer, and you talk about the efficiency of the computation improving. The prover side of things won't necessarily need changes, but we'll still need to throw big-brained grugs at better and better versions of some better and better runtimes. Maybe.
You might, but at the end of the day, the runtime is about to get really, really good, really, really fast. And my expectation is that while it will benefit from continued resource allocation, it will serve most of its desired purposes very soon in perpetuity.
And then I have a follow-up to that. Like one pragmatic problem, quote unquote, with using your computer for using your Urbit for everything is that, if it's chugging along on some kind of ZK in the background while I'm just trying to shitpost with my friends, is that an issue? Would you want to have a Moon be doing this stuff on your behalf, or would it be okay? I mean, or maybe Aries just totally solved this problem, but for right now, I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so from my perspective, for a long time to come, at least the next few years, I guess, time moves fast. You would expect to only want to be proving particular things, not say every single thing you're doing.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. So it's sort of like the just an occasional I mean, it's funny because it's sort of like in this new world, you could imagine these transactions becoming more and more common. I mean, hopefully, right? But that'd be amazing if the computer was mostly doing that.
We expect that we'll be able to get to a point sometime in the next 3 to 5 years where you'll be able to be, running physics engines that are inside, of Nock ZKVM. In other words,
you heard it here first.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of want people to be able to play Halo and do things like lock up money based on who wins the Halo match.
Yeah, I mean, that is the goal. Gambling on Halo is the future that I mean, that's all I want. I'm a very modest person.
I mean, Unity is ripe for some market competition right now. People are pissed. So.
That's true, but I think Zorp's got plenty on their plate. I think so. Might do a subsidiary.
So as it stands, what's the prover overhead, as opposed to just running plain Nock? What's the overhead of running a prover over it?
I don't know that I could give you a precise estimate. Somewhere between, how about this? Somewhere between 500x and maybe 2500x.
Have you
it's
done
like,
performance
is
stuff?
it constant, right? It's like I don't know. It's not. It doesn't depend on the like size of the computation. Is it which like type of proof is it? Like I'm not that well versed in it, but like is it the constant prover overhead or does it scale with computation size?
Yeah, so there's no such thing as constant prover overhead. There is constant verifier overhead. What we're just talking about at this point is having succinct verifiers. In other words, the verifiers scale as a polylog of the amount of work in the original computations, which is marginal. I believe it's Mark's turn. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Logan.
Oh, Hodreb. I know.
Yeah.
I didn't recognize you.
Can you give us any color on a potential L1 on Urbit you guys might be working on?
Yep, I don't think we've got any color on that now, but I think that there's a lot of fun things that are coming out the pipe, and yeah, I can neither confirm nor deny.
L1 on Urbit would be nice, whoever builds it, for sure. For sure. Mark, have you solved your...
I was.
No, he can...
I dropped off earlier because I was only on to say you can actually join Twitter Spaces from the website. So I'm on my.
He's on tech support. You jumped up to say this.
We're here to deliver you. You know, we're in the information business. We deliver everybody
high
quality information. Logan, you don't need to install the Twitter app.
Oh wow! Wow.
But
I've
been duped.
Lockdown mode, so I definitely can't do it from the mobile website.
You know, hey, Logan, if you want to, like, you see all these guys doing the ZK proofs of Bitcoin.
I did see that. Yeah.
Hey, if somebody wants to just like port, you know, a SPV prover into Zorp, that would be awesome. We can just have BTC as the L1.
Yeah, there's all kinds of fun things you could do with proofs of Bitcoin.
Very nice. Let's see. What was I going to say? Okay, so we're coming to the end of the time here. I was going to say, you said you guys are sponsoring the hackathon. Is that correct? Can you? Are you guys also speaking at Assembly coming up in Lisbon?
Yeah. We will be bringing the entire team, all 9 of us.
Very nice.
To Assembly, and we will be speaking and probably be talking to people too. We probably won't be showing people. So
you won't just like come in. I think I saw a video of Vitalik doing that once, where he just like went, he like didn't even greet the audience. He just like charged up and then like gave a talk and then left immediately. Just its own kind of power move, you know.
Yeah. It's, you know, it's possible, but I expect we'll probably talk to people.
That's good. And then so that's Assembly coming up at Lisbon at the end of October 28th and 29th, and then we're gonna have Urbit Week. Plenty of stuff going on then. And then I was also going to say you are participating in the UAC accelerator, correct?
Yes, sir.
Very nice. So for those of you that are listening that are not aware, we did our first sort of crop of an accelerator this year. And from all reports, it's going very well. Zorp, of course, is already kind of established. So we have some established companies participating as well. But there are a few new guys. I think we had 3, some of whom representatives of which are in this very Twitter space. So they'll also be doing some stuff at Urbit Assembly. So I encourage everybody who's listening and interested in Urbit to look out for. I think we're going to do another batch of that accelerator pretty soon here. So if you guys are interested in getting some mentorship and a little bit of funding to work on an Urbit project, that would be a good option. Okay, well, dude, this is super fun. It's great connecting with you, and I think, I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Lisbon because it's been a while.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be great to see you too, and yeah, thanks for the time.
Do you have anything else you'd like to direct people to, or I was going to say one thing you could do is if you have that blog post about if you have any blog posts that you would like people to read, you could just respond to this tweet with them. I think they'll be notified.
Cool. I think I can do that.
All right. It's great talking to you. Thank you, everybody, for logging on here. And we'll see you next week.
Yeah, peace, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Peace.